He was in the hotel, and I seen C's. I'm like, where he at, cuz? He like, he upstairs. I'm like, let me holler at him. He like, hold on. Because, they didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
They was...
Snoop Dogg is shocking the world by naming the man who murdered Tupac. While countless rumors have been created for nearly 3 decades, many people even suspect Snoop Dogg is the murderer. Now, everything related to Tupac's tragic death has been clarified by Snoop Dogg himself. What's worth mentioning is that he bravely confronted him to avenge Tupac. Are you ready to hear his strong accusation? Let's get started. In a candid interview, Snoop Dogg recently opened up about a harrowing moment from his past that has haunted him for years. The day he saw his friend and fellow rap icon Tupac Shakur after he was gunned down in Las Vegas in 1996. Snoop, who was at the height of his own career at the time, was deeply shaken by Shakur's condition in the hospital. Recalling the incident, he admitted he fainted when he laid eyes on his friend, overwhelmed by the severity of Tupac's injuries. The drive-by shooting that led to Tupac's death left an indelible mark not only on Snoop, but on the hip-hop community and music fans worldwide. Shakur's assassination has long been surrounded by conspiracy theories, mystery, and unanswered questions. The shooting occurred on September 7, 1996, as Shakur was in the passenger seat of a black BMW being driven by Suge Knight, the co-founder of Death Row Records. Shakur and Knight had attended a Mike Tyson boxing match at the MGM Grand earlier that evening, after which they were involved in an altercation with a gang member in the casino. This confrontation would become a critical point in the investigation, as many speculated that it may have led to retaliation against Shakur. As Knight drove down Las Vegas Boulevard, a white Cadillac pulled up alongside their car and shots were fired. 4 bullets struck Shakur, including 2 in the chest. One of these punctured his right lung, causing life-threatening damage. Knight also sustained minor injuries from bullet fragments. Despite the serious wounds he suffered, Shakur initially clung to life in the hospital, where he was placed on life support in a desperate attempt to save him. Tragically, he succumbed to his injuries 6 days later, on September 13, 1996, at the age of 25. When Snoop Dogg arrived at the hospital to visit his friend, he was unprepared for the sight that awaited him. Known for his tough persona, Snoop had weathered many difficult moments, but seeing Shakur in such a vulnerable and broken state was too much to bear. "I fainted," he recalled, describing the overwhelming mix of grief and helplessness he felt upon seeing Shakur hooked up to machines, fighting for his life. The image of his friend, a man who had been so full of life and energy, now reduced to a fragile state, left a lasting impression on Snoop and underscored the devastating impact of violence within their world. Tupac's death marked a turning point in the music industry, and his legacy has only grown in the years since. As an artist, Tupac was a voice for marginalized communities, addressing social issues, racism, and systemic inequality through his music. His work resonated deeply with fans and continues to influence new generations. However, his untimely death exposed the darker side of the rap scene, with its ties to gang violence, rivalry, and crime. The East Coast-West Coast feud, which pitted artists from different regions against each other, had escalated to dangerous levels in the mid-90s, leading to heightened tensions and, eventually, bloodshed. Suge Knight, who was driving the car during the fatal shooting, also played a central role in the intense world of gangsta rap. Known for his larger-than-life presence and reputation for violence, Knight was a key figure in Death Row Records, the label that helped propel Shakur and Snoop Dogg to fame. While Knight survived the shooting with only minor injuries, his life would later be marred by controversy and legal troubles. In 2015, Knight was involved in a fatal hit-and-run incident following an altercation on a movie set. The case ended in Knight pleading no contest to voluntary manslaughter, and he received a 28-year prison sentence. During a recent appearance on Logan Paul's Impulsive podcast, Snoop Dogg shared a heartbreaking account of the day he visited Tupac Shakur in the hospital following the Las Vegas drive-by shooting that would ultimately claim his friend's life. Known for his smooth and laid-back persona, Snoop opened up with uncharacteristic vulnerability, detailing the shock, confusion, and overwhelming sadness he felt upon seeing Tupac in critical condition. Reflecting on his long friendship with the rap legend, Snoop painted a vivid picture of the encounter, leaving listeners with a rare insight into his emotions during one of the darkest moments of his life. Snoop recounted that his initial meeting with Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight gave him a glimmer of hope. When Snoop and his associates met with Suge after the incident, Knight had a bandage on his head from minor injuries sustained in the shooting. Suge, who had been driving the car with Tupac in the passenger seat when they were ambushed, tried to reassure Snoop and the others, even as he nursed his own wounds. "We just talking to Suge," Snoop recalled, "and he got the head wrapped up and he told us what happened, and saying, 'Pac gonna be all right, he gonna pull through. He got shot 9 times before, he going to be all right.'" Knight's words referred to an earlier incident in 1994, when Tupac survived 5 gunshot wounds in a Manhattan recording studio. It was a traumatic episode that had only solidified Tupac's reputation as a resilient fighter, someone who seemed to come back stronger each time. This attempt at reassurance gave Snoop and those close to Tupac a fragile sense of hope. They believed Tupac's survival instincts would help him pull through once more. However, as they made their way to the hospital to visit their friend, that hope began to wane. As Snoop arrived and entered Tupac's hospital room, the reality of the situation hit him harder than he had anticipated. He could feel a sense of heaviness in the air, something that made him instinctively realize that this time was different. "We feeling like it's gonna be all right until we go to the hospital and see that it ain't all right. He got tubes in him," Snoop recounted. The sight of Tupac in such a frail, unresponsive state, hooked up to machines and fighting for each breath, left him emotionally devastated. As Snoop stepped into the hospital room, the full weight of the situation overcame him. "When I walked in, I could just feel like he wasn't even there, and I fainted," he said. Snoop, who had witnessed his share of hardship and violence growing up, was utterly unprepared for this encounter. To see his friend, a man whose strength and energy had inspired so many, lying in such a vulnerable state was overwhelming. The experience left a profound mark on him, a memory he would carry with him for the rest of his life. In that difficult time, it was Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mother and a former Black Panther activist, who became a pillar of strength for Snoop. Known for her resilience and spirit, Afeni comforted him at a moment when he felt completely broken by the sight of his friend in such a critical state. Snoop remembered her encouraging him to pull himself together, reminding him of the bond he shared with Tupac, despite any recent tensions that might have strained their friendship. Upon arriving at the hospital, Snoop was visibly shaken. The combination of seeing Tupac hooked up to machines and the overwhelming grief left him vulnerable and in shock. But Afeni stepped in, sensing Snoop's heartbreak and his struggle to stay composed. Her words were firm yet tender as she reminded him, "My baby ain't never seen you weak. I don't want you to be weak in front of him." In that instant, Afeni wasn't just talking to Snoop as her son's friend. She was speaking to him as someone who understood the depth of their connection. Her presence reminded Snoop of the strength Tupac himself had inherited from her, the same strength that had allowed him to rise above hardship and speak boldly through his music. Afeni's words struck Snoop in a profound way. She knew that there had been moments of tension between him and Tupac in the months before the shooting, but she also understood the strong undercurrent of love and mutual respect that lay beneath those disagreements. In Afeni's eyes, that bond was what mattered most now. She urged Snoop to put aside any lingering misunderstandings, to gather himself and share his feelings honestly with Tupac one last time. "You go in the bathroom and fix yourself up," she told him, "and you go back in there and you talk to him, and you tell him how you feel. My baby loves you." With Afeni's encouragement, Snoop was able to compose himself and step back into the room, where he was finally able to express his love and gratitude to Tupac. It was a moment he knew would be his last chance to say goodbye. Afeni's guidance had given him a moment of clarity, the strength to communicate the depth of his friendship with Tupac, a friendship that had been tested but never broken. As he spoke to Tupac, he let go of the recent conflicts and misunderstandings that had come between them, choosing instead to focus on the love and respect they had shared over the years. 6 days after Snoop Dogg's visit to the hospital, Tupac Shakur succumbed to his injuries, leaving a lasting void in the world of hip-hop. The loss was especially painful for Snoop, not only because of the tragic circumstances, but also due to the unresolved tension that had marked their last interaction. In 2019, Snoop opened up on Hot 97, sharing the unsettling story of the final time he saw Tupac, which left him with a lingering sense of regret. Snoop explained that just before Shakur's death, they had been on uneasy terms, strained by the notorious East Coast-West Coast rap feud that had escalated to dangerous levels. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry was at its peak during the mid-1990s, a cultural and territorial divide that had pitted some of hip-hop's biggest names against each other. Tupac Shakur, a prominent West Coast rapper and a leading figure on Suge Knight's Death Row Records, had become heavily involved in this feud, with much of his music and public statements directed at East Coast figures. At the heart of this conflict was the tension between Tupac and Christopher Wallace, known as the Notorious B.I.G., one of New York's biggest stars. Their conflict was not only personal, but also emblematic of a broader rivalry between the coasts, fueled by both industry politics and personal grievances. Snoop, however, did not share Tupac's fervor for the feud. He had friends and collaborators on both coasts, and had made it clear that he didn't hold any animosity toward East Coast artists, including Biggie Smalls. This neutral stance became a point of contention between Snoop and Tupac. During the Hot 97 interview, Snoop recalled an incident when he expressed on air that he didn't harbor any ill will toward East Coast rappers. He respected artists on both sides of the country and was uncomfortable with the escalating animosity. For Snoop, music was a unifying force, and he struggled with the idea of being forced into a conflict based solely on geography. Unfortunately, his stance didn't sit well with Tupac, who saw it as a betrayal. Snoop's comment on East Coast rappers appeared to Tupac as a lack of loyalty, especially at a time when Tupac was deeply invested in what he saw as a battle between the coasts. In Tupac's view, their crew needed to present a united front, especially given his own intense public feud with Biggie. Snoop's comments were a departure from the unwavering loyalty Tupac expected, and he felt let down by his friend's neutral position. After Snoop's remarks, the two had an uncomfortable encounter on a flight back to Los Angeles, which would become their last shared moment. According to Snoop, Tupac refused to speak to him, maintaining a tense silence throughout the flight. The camaraderie and warmth that usually defined their friendship were absent, replaced by an emotional distance that left Snoop feeling isolated and unsure of how to bridge the gap between them. Adding to the tension, Suge Knight, the formidable CEO of Death Row Records, barred Snoop's security team from joining him on the plane, a move that made Snoop feel even more vulnerable and estranged from his crew. The silence on that flight weighed heavily on Snoop, who knew that his words had disappointed his friend, but felt torn about taking sides in a feud he didn't believe in. He would later describe that plane ride as one of the most uncomfortable experiences of his life, realizing that he was powerless to mend the rift between himself and Tupac in that moment. It was a stark contrast to the bond they had shared for years, a friendship rooted in mutual respect, shared ambitions, and a common love for music. That silent flight was the last time Snoop saw Tupac alive, and the unresolved tension lingered long after his friend's death. Now that everything related to Tupac's death has been cleared up by Snoop Dogg, public attention is once again focused on the feud between Snoop Dogg and Suge Knight. Known for his laid-back demeanor and smooth, lyrical style, Snoop's gangsta credentials were more than just an image cultivated for the music industry. They were based in real-life affiliations and struggles that would shape his career and personal life. Long before he became a household name, Snoop was affiliated with the Rollin' 20 Crips, a notorious Long Beach gang. By his teenage years, he had already experienced brushes with the law, including a prison stint for drug possession, a formative experience that added a layer of authenticity to the stories he would later tell in his music. Snoop's early involvement with the Crips not only informed his street credibility, but also brought a raw, realistic edge to his music, setting him apart from other emerging artists. His journey to fame began with his collaboration with Dr. Dre on the seminal album The Chronic, where Snoop's smooth flow and unique voice quickly captivated listeners. Dre recognized Snoop's potential and brought him into the fold at Death Row Records, a label that would soon become the epicenter of West Coast gangsta rap. With the release of his debut album Doggy Style under Death Row, Snoop's career skyrocketed as he offered listeners a window into the gritty realities of life on the streets. Snoop's music on Death Row was deeply influenced by his own life and the gang culture he had grown up around. Songs like Gin and Juice and Murder Was the Case captured a vivid, unflinching look at a lifestyle that was both dangerous and alluring. Snoop's storytelling conveyed the struggles, aspirations, and hardships of young black men growing up in impoverished, crime-ridden neighborhoods, resonating with a generation that identified with his experiences. This authenticity, combined with his charisma, made him an instant icon in the genre. However, as Death Row Records rose to prominence, it also became increasingly notorious for its internal conflicts, violent rivalries, and Suge Knight's iron-fisted management style. Suge Knight, co-founder and CEO of Death Row, played a major role in creating an atmosphere that blurred the lines between art and reality. Known for his intimidating presence and his own connections to gang culture, Knight fostered a chaotic environment within Death Row, where loyalty was often enforced through fear, and disputes were sometimes settled with violence. What began as a groundbreaking record label representing West Coast talent devolved into a turbulent world of high-stakes rivalries and dangerous power plays. Knight's influence on Death Row and its artists was profound. His close association with the Bloods, a rival gang to the Crips, only fueled tensions. Despite Snoop's affiliation with the Crips, he and Knight initially maintained a productive working relationship, largely because Snoop's success was helping to define Death Row's brand. However, the tension at Death Row escalated as Suge increasingly imposed his authority, and artists like Snoop, Tupac Shakur, and Dr. Dre found themselves caught in the crossfire of an environment that seemed to oscillate between a creative hub and a battleground. Tupac's arrival at Death Row in 1995 amplified the intensity within the label. Recently released from prison and seething with resentment toward East Coast rivals, Tupac's energy and aggression brought Death Row to new heights and new levels of conflict. His loyalty to Suge Knight and alignment with the East Coast-West Coast rivalry set him at odds with artists who preferred to avoid the feud, including Snoop. Despite this, Tupac and Snoop shared a mutual respect and a camaraderie that added layers to their complicated relationship within the label. The events of 1996 proved to be a turning point for Death Row and gangsta rap as a whole. That year, Suge Knight was convicted of racketeering, resulting in prison time. His absence left a power vacuum within Death Row, and the label began to unravel. Then came the tragic murder of Tupac Shakur in Las Vegas, a crime still shrouded in conspiracy and speculation. Suge, who was driving the car the night Tupac was shot, has since been implicated in countless theories surrounding the murder. The incident marked the beginning of the end for Death Row, as the combination of legal troubles, violent incidents, and leadership conflicts plunged the label into chaos. Snoop Dogg's life took a significant turn in the late 1990s, a period that saw him undergo a profound personal and artistic transformation. In 1996, Snoop was acquitted of a murder charge that had haunted him since 1993, a case that could have derailed his career and possibly ended his freedom. The case, which received national media attention and amplified Snoop's reputation as a gangsta rapper, marked a period of intense scrutiny and reflection for the young artist. The acquittal offered Snoop not just relief, but a second chance, one he wouldn't take for granted. Reflecting on this experience, he came to see the incident as a wake-up call that pushed him to evolve both as an artist and as a person. In the wake of his legal troubles, Snoop sought to distance himself from the violent, gang-related themes that had defined much of his early music. His debut album, Doggy Style, released under Death Row Records, showcased the raw, gritty sound of West Coast gangsta rap that both glorified and narrated the street life he knew firsthand. But following his acquittal, Snoop began to see the downside of glorifying violence, especially as he faced the very real consequences of a life entangled with crime and gangs. The experience motivated him to redefine his identity and message in his sophomore album, Tha Dogfather. Released in 1996, Tha Dogfather represented a shift in tone for Snoop Dogg. It wasn't just an album, it was a statement. He no longer wanted to be a mouthpiece for the more dangerous aspects of gangsta culture that Death Row Records was known for. Snoop recalled his mindset during that period, saying, "The Dogfather was a rebirth of me. I'm not going to glorify none of this negativity that Death Row wanted me to do. I'm going to bring a positive side of music." He was now on a journey to offer a different narrative, one that showed growth, resilience, and positivity, rather than an endless cycle of violence and retribution. This personal transformation coincided with a growing rift between Snoop and Suge Knight, the co-founder and imposing force behind Death Row Records. Knight, whose controversial reputation was underscored by rumors of intimidation tactics and criminal affiliations, had built Death Row into a powerhouse by championing gangsta rap's raw intensity. Under Knight's leadership, Death Row became synonymous with the dangerous allure of the gangsta lifestyle, cultivating an image that was both menacing and captivating. For Snoop, however, the environment became increasingly stifling, as Knight's influence perpetuated a culture of violence that Snoop no longer wanted to endorse. His desire to embrace positivity clashed directly with Knight's expectations, further fueling the tension between them. The release of Tha Dogfather marked Snoop's public declaration of independence from the darker themes associated with Death Row. He infused the album with a message of personal growth and redemption, setting it apart from the label's usual focus on gritty street tales and aggressive rivalries. This shift in tone wasn't just a creative decision, it was a reflection of Snoop's changing worldview. Having narrowly escaped a life behind bars, he felt a responsibility to use his platform for something more meaningful. He wanted his music to inspire rather than contribute to the cycle of violence that had claimed so many lives around him, including that of his friend and label mate, Tupac Shakur, who was murdered the same year. Snoop's departure from Death Row in 1996 was a critical move in his career. Free from the shadow of Suge Knight's influence, he sought a fresh start that would allow him to explore his artistry without being tethered to the gangsta image. His exit from the label marked a symbolic break from a lifestyle he no longer identified with and a rejection of the values that had come to define Death Row. While Knight continued to embrace a more aggressive approach, Snoop was determined to carve a different path, one that aligned with his newfound perspective on life and music. Over the next several years, Snoop's career took on a new direction as he focused on music that was more celebratory, collaborative, and optimistic. He explored different genres, experimented with new sounds, and embraced themes of unity and positivity. This evolution allowed him to maintain his relevance in an industry that was rapidly changing and also to reinvent himself as an artist who could transcend the limitations of gangsta rap. His shift in tone and subject matter reflected a maturation that would come to define his career, ultimately solidifying him as one of hip-hop's most versatile and enduring figures. By the late 1990s, Snoop Dogg's tumultuous relationship with Death Row Records and its CEO, Suge Knight, reached a breaking point. Knight, once a close ally and crucial figure in launching Snoop's career, had been convicted of parole violations in 1997 and sentenced to 6 years in prison. His absence, along with the deteriorating state of Death Row Records following the death of Tupac Shakur and Dr. Dre's departure, left the label in disarray. Snoop, looking to escape the toxic environment of Death Row and Knight's domineering presence, saw an opportunity to reinvent himself elsewhere. In a surprising move, he joined Master P's No Limit Records, finding in it a sanctuary from the chaos that had come to define his former label. For Snoop, the move to No Limit was not just a career change, but a chance to redefine himself without the shadow of his past associations. Describing his exit from Death Row, Snoop remarked, "I was working against the devil, and through the grace of God, Master P and Priority Records put a deal together that was suitable for me." This decision was liberating for Snoop. He found in Master P a mentor who was more business-focused and supportive than Suge Knight. Under Master P's guidance, Snoop was encouraged to expand his artistic range and explore a less confrontational image. The shift allowed Snoop to focus on his music, enjoy creative freedom, and steer clear of the gang-related themes that had plagued his time at Death Row. Snoop's departure from Death Row ignited a bitter feud between him and Suge Knight. Resentful over Snoop's decision to leave, Knight continued to wield his influence, even from behind bars. What began as subtle remarks soon escalated into a full-blown war of words. Knight, still controlling what was left of Death Row's assets, didn't hesitate to undermine Snoop in the media, casting aspersions on his loyalty and work ethic. In response, Snoop wasn't afraid to retaliate through his music, using his lyrics to call out Knight's oppressive tactics and the toxic environment he had fostered at Death Row. One of Snoop's most direct responses to Knight came in the track Pimp Slapped from his Paid the Cost to Be the Boss album. In it, Snoop did not hold back, addressing Knight explicitly and condemning his manipulative tactics. The song encapsulated Snoop's frustration with his former label boss, airing grievances about the fear, control, and betrayal he felt under Knight's rule. Pimp Slapped was Snoop's way of reclaiming his narrative, giving voice to his experiences with Knight and the hardships he faced at Death Row. It also represented his desire to move on from the gangsta image that Death Row had come to symbolize as he began to evolve into a more versatile and mainstream artist. Despite years of public feuding, Suge Knight and Snoop Dogg eventually found a way to reconcile. Knight, who was released from prison in 2001, returned to the public eye with a defiant tone. Known for his ruthlessness, he made it clear that he hadn't forgotten past conflicts, telling The Guardian, "It'll be like the Wild West all over again. I got plenty of scores to settle." This declaration seemed like a foreboding return to the violent rivalries that had defined the gangsta rap era of the 1990s. However, the landscape of hip-hop was shifting, and a more mature approach was emerging. By 2005, Snoop Dogg was ready to put the past behind him, and with Knight's return, he saw an opportunity to foster a spirit of unity rather than reignite old grudges. In 2005, Snoop organized the Unify the West Summit, an initiative designed to end lingering beefs and unite West Coast artists who had previously been divided by conflict and rivalry. For Snoop, the summit was an opportunity to build bridges in a community that had suffered from internal feuds and an often violent reputation. The meeting symbolized Snoop's evolution from gangsta rapper to an elder statesman of West Coast hip-hop, someone who was willing to step up and create a sense of peace within the community. As MTV reported, the summit provided Snoop and Knight with a chance to reconcile. It was a significant moment in their complicated relationship, demonstrating Snoop's commitment to growth and his belief in the possibility of redemption, even for someone as divisive as Knight. Reflecting on his time working with Knight, Snoop now looks back on it with a sense of gratitude, calling the experience beautiful. In an interview with Ambrosia for Heads, Snoop described the early days of his career with Death Row Records not as dark and oppressive, but as a period of intense creativity and innovation. Despite the violence, control, and drama that surrounded the label, it was also a place where Snoop, Dr. Dre, and Tupac Shakur created some of hip-hop's most influential music. For Snoop, time and maturity have allowed him to appreciate the artistry that emerged from that era, even if the circumstances were far from ideal. Yet while Snoop found peace with his past, Knight's life took a far darker turn. By 2018, Suge Knight had once again found himself on the wrong side of the law. This time, the charges were severe. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison for manslaughter following a fatal hit-and-run incident in 2015. The incident took place on the set of Straight Outta Compton, a film chronicling the rise of NWA and the birth of gangsta rap, a movement in which Knight played a central role. During an altercation, Knight struck and killed 55-year-old Terry Carter with his vehicle, an act that would lead to one of the most significant legal consequences of his life. For Knight, who had once wielded immense power in the music industry, this marked a tragic downfall. Snoop's reconciliation with Knight in 2005 and his efforts to unify West Coast hip-hop had given the two men a chance to move forward, but their lives diverged sharply after that. Snoop went on to build a multifaceted career, evolving from his gangsta rap roots into a beloved mainstream icon known for his laid-back, humorous persona. Knight, on the other hand, continued to be haunted by his reputation and legal troubles, becoming more of a tragic figure than a feared mogul. Snoop's decision to reconcile with Knight can be seen as part of his broader commitment to positivity and personal growth. The summit's success allowed him to close a tumultuous chapter in his life, even as Knight's fate remained defined by conflict and violence. What do you think about the conflicts between Snoop Dogg and Suge Knight and the tragic death of Tupac? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.